Okay, Paula and we're going to be guilty of too much information in too short a time, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time. We're going to whip through a bit of this, and but you know, when we have the discussion time, then hopefully we can explain and discuss further. So today we're going to speak about, as Lisa said, the Ourselves, Our Daughters project, and examine the model that we used. An integrated approach to community-based research and programming with an African newcomer community, addressing female genital cutting in Winnipeg. Today, then, we're going to briefly, a few introductory comments, and then we're going to talk about phase one research, which was a community engagement and research process, an integrated process. That was how we started our work. Then we will, I guess near the tail end, give you a little taste of our most recent research phase, the community-based research piece, looking at whole community approaches to change. This is who we are, Sexuality Education Resource Center Manitoba. There is our mission, and we have a number of years' experience working in immigrant and refugee communities. And this is our project team. We've got Simrat at the back in green and black blazer, and Linda Plennert, who will be back there as well, presenting later on today, Paula and myself. We, as an organization, believe that FGC or FGM is a form of is a gender-based violence, but it is also a long-standing tradition, a women-held tradition. And in our work, because we're working at a community grassroots level, we must find the balance between the human rights stance, but also making sure that we, and it's not either or, but also we need to respect and affirm women and their cultures. And we'll speak more about the hows as we go along. And the point we make, which I don't know if we need to make it for you, but we know in our heart of hearts the women who are practicing FGC, they love their daughters. That is 100% clear to us. And we also speak, which again I think our previous presenters have spoken to very eloquently, there is a continuum of gender-based violence. And you know, it's important to acknowledge that violence is happening to women all over the world, in all countries, and I think that's sort of what this quotation by Thoreau and Cornwell is speaking to, the universality of women's oppression. So the project itself, you know, we had two main goals. One is to work closely with African refugee women and allies in their communities to enhance through education, you know, educational supports, social supports, and health supports to women affected by FGC, and address prevention among daughters. And I should clarify, the wording isn't maybe clear. We didn't work with daughters. What we're saying is we want to prevent the occurrence of FGC in the next generation amongst daughters of the women we work with. And you know, there's some parallels to, in some ways we're reinventing the wheel, I know, but some parallels to what has happened in the past in Toronto. To increase cultural competence in service providers, we do a fair amount of service provider training as well. So the project overall, we're just reporting on sort of one piece of it, consisted of a phase of community engagement and research, community education with women, and service provider training. I'd also like to mention and thank the other members of this research phase, Dehab, Aster, and Maria, who is here today. So thank you very much, Maria. The goals then of this phase of engagement and research were, and you'll see that you know, I'm speaking in terms of both community development and engagement as well as community-based research. We're to build trust and relationship with the community, to sensitize the community to the fact that we, upon invitation, would like to further explore and address FGC, to identify allies in the community who, you know, we were working with some already, but to see who else was out there who would be supporting us in this work, therefore build a broader base of support, and to learn. It was very evident to us that we needed to learn more and learn from the community and have a two-way exchange. And I would say that initially in planning the project, we thought maybe we could just hold workshops for women the way we had been around other issues. It was upon the advice of a community leader who said, this phase is really important first. The research paradigm then would be, as I said, we're integrating principles of community development and community-based research. You can see some of the hallmarks of community-based research, research to action, an emphasis on qualitative methodology. Hearing people's stories and words firsthand was very important. Participatory processes and co-learning, those are sort of the hallmarks of community-based research. And as I've mentioned, we were invited by the community to carry out this work. And we worked on multiple levels, which is, again, a community development process to work with leaders, both men and women, and also work at the grassroots level with women in general in the community. In terms of methodology, these are just some of the steps that we took and the strategies that we used. So we first, with the small team and the community allies that we had, identified some of the major groups within this community. There were about 7 major religious and ethnic groups. Our project facilitator, Simrit, contacted the leaders from those groups, and they were all men, of course. And then she served as a bridge, and we met face-to-face and had conversations. Once we met at a pool hall, once we met at Tim Hortons, and had these face-to-face meetings. We were we found the same kind of thing, that the men were universally supportive of us working with women in the communities and with men in the communities around change. So that was wonderful. We also, through them, received referrals to women leaders, because that was something that we were interested in. Of course, there were women leaders. They may not have been the lead person for a formal organization, so we had sort of that informal organized sector as well. And some of the men helped us bring women to groups, helped us organize, helped announce it at a gathering, so it was a very increasingly participatory process. We met and did a series of interviews with leaders and 5 focus groups with women at the grassroots level. That's 30 women. And follow-up interviews with some of the women as well. Questions were asked in first language, but Simrit was interpreting the whole time, and notes were taken in first language. We had hired a woman from the community, and she then transcribed it for us in English, because we're dodos and we couldn't understand otherwise. But that was great, and the data that was gathered was very rich. We had participatory processes for data analysis, which again is another hallmark of community-based research. So we had all this wonderful information in people's words expressing their emotions and thoughts, and we then summarized to some extent what we thought were some of the main themes, and we met with leaders and separately with women, and followed with interpreters, and followed a sort of a very workshop-y process, but also community-based process to get some added nuance, to affirm the findings, and to sort of augment our findings. You can just see from this slide, we were able to access in our groups mainly newcomer women, mainly of childbearing age, but of course we did have a few women who were older, because FGC generally, at least in the community we're working with, is they play a key role in supporting and maintaining the practice. Some ethical considerations. There were a number of ethical considerations, not only in the research process, but in the project as a whole. Ethical, in terms of research, but also how we work in community in a respectful manner. So, of course, we had an informed consent process, but one of the issues that arose in the process of consultations was a request from a leader to maintain the confidentiality of the community. So this was an interesting request. He spoke of the level of discrimination and racism that the community was facing, and felt that this could further perpetuate stereotypes and discrimination. So we listened to that, and then at our feedback meetings we spoke to the leaders, who interestingly, the vast majority did not have that same concern. But we're moving along, and we probably have a better trust, a sense of rapport and trust with the community as well by this point in time. In fact, beyond that, many were very proud of the project and wanted to put their name to it. So this is an issue we've been struggling with throughout the project. We have many people telling us, yes, loud and proud, and others who saying, So until we hear, and we ultimately it goes back to the women. So we held a focus group in the summer, but we have sort of mixed feelings about it. So we're still checking in, and that's why we are referring to it as an African community project. But we actually hope to broaden our work into other communities, and then the point may become a little moot as we can sort of speak in generalities. I'll let Paula take over from here on the findings.
Yeah, I want to speak about what we learned from the women and the communities as we moved in that first phase of community engagement and research. One of the things that we learned in terms of the methodology was to start by asking general questions about the immigrant or the refugee experience of the community to get into the most specific issues around female genital cutting. So we learned that most of the community were refugees and that they have been displaced by war. And interestingly enough, they had a high degree of mobilization and an organization within their own community, but still they were dealing with a lot of issues around adaptation, basic needs, and even culture shock. As you see in the sample of women that we were able to speak to, they were very newcomer. Most of them were under 2 years in the country. So there were a lot of adaptation-related issues. And also, we heard that through the process of transmigration, many have lived in refugee camps. Their life had been changed, and women and men were affected in different ways. Many of the women were single mothers, and as a result of displacement and war. And from the perspective of the women, they felt that also men have been affected, and that men felt became as second-class citizens, and also that in Canada they have been challenged by this new social and cultural environment, and women felt that men needed to change as well. One of them, and I quote, says, "Men needed to unlearn what they have learned," speaking about some of the changes that they have faced as a result of migration in their own families and communities. So we started to talk more about their experience with health and health care in Canada. So the issue of health, access to health was the entry point for us to have these conversations. And women spoke about their physical health as an important issue, and because, again, there were younger women in the reproductive years, they had experiences with the healthcare system around the perinatal or reproductive health needs. And what was clear from the conversation is that culturally it was not appropriate for them to express their needs around access to care or prevention, and in particular express their pain or illness. So, in spite of the fact that physical health was the most important issue that they brought up, many spoke about the state of emotional health, and they felt that it was as important to talk about the issues around stress or depression, and they worry over their children as a very important issue in their life as newcomers. In terms of access to care, women have both positive and negative experiences, and all these things, all their experiences were mediated by mostly language barriers, and that's probably not a surprise. They had a very limited understanding of how the healthcare system worked, and they tended to rely on other women's or their own knowledge of health to look after themselves. So one of the women said, you could talk with your best friends, and if you feel they could be confidential. If you have the health knowledge, you can take care of yourself and your health because it is personal. Even when going to the doctors, you don't tell everything. And they were mostly referring about, talking about reproductive health issues. So they do not raise these reproductive concerns as often. And they use a very generic term for all kind of issues, reproductive and sexual health concern, as it's uterus or I have uterus. So that came again and again as a way of speaking about women's health issues. We spoke as well around sexuality and sexual health in general, and there were issues regarding their overall life as embedded in the community and in their families. So they were concerned about intergenerational conflict regarding to sexuality with their kids growing up in Canada, and a lot of concern about the youth. When it came to more of their own sexuality and sexual health and intimacy, it was clear that women did not just communicate about sex and sexuality with their partners, although some of them seem to have hinted that that might be changing. And all of them believe that it was the duty of the woman to please the desires of men. In terms of sexual health itself, they felt that they wanted access to information, access to services and information about access to pap smears and HIV, hepatitis C, perinatal care. All those issues came up as important to them. But still, they did not have basic knowledge on about anatomy and physiology, how things worked. And then is how we ease our way into speaking more directly about female genital mutilation or cutting. And so we learned from these communities that the circumcision is practiced very early in the girl's life without a celebration around it. And there has been very little discussion about the practice. But women will face a lot of questions and expectations, for instance, for older women or grandmothers. And here in the community, they would hear more if as soon as a girl was born, are you going to circumcise, or what are you going to do about that? And sort of a lot of the women felt pressure around that or have those questions. And it was something that women will arrange and perform and deal with any of the complications within the community. And it could happen, some of them will talk about the fact that it could happen without the consent of even mothers or the father in the family. So again, there was very little conversation and discussion, communication between husband and the women around this practice. Although some of them expressed that that was changing, that this has become more of a topic of conversation within the families. And some of them have heard or read about the anti-FGM campaigns happening back home. And that there was change in legislation. Even though some didn't know what the legislation was for Canada, they will assume that was illegal based on the assumption that the knowledge that back home was illegal. So still, women were divided on their belief about the continuation or not of the practice. And some of them were conflicted. So that was clear, and the space was safe enough for women to be able to express their views and beliefs. So one of them says, this is our culture, and that was referred, this is our culture. And there is nothing bad for both sexes to get circumcised. I have 3 girls, and all of them were circumcised at childhood. My sister's sons also got circumcised. But now it is not allowed legally for girls. So, sort of a bit bringing up the issue that is not legally allowed, but still sort of there is a support for it. And then we explored what are some of the beliefs around continuation or discontinuation of the practice. In terms of the continuation, there was the belief that there was a cultural practice that should continue. Basically, that was supported most by older women. And to reduce, was important to reduce female sexual desire. So women would then get into premarital sex or extramarital sex, will prevent that, will ensure virginity or non-marriageability. And for some who will say that they will prevent rape, and that was mentioned this morning. And for others, it was a sort of a cleansing practice, keeping the woman pure, so there wouldn't be that urge to touch herself. Because of the diversity of the women and the different ethnic groups represented within that group, we heard that there were all these many different reasons for why the practice should be continuing. Then we spoke about some of the reasons, and the women spoke about that to support this continuation of the practice. And some of them felt that may not decrease the sexual desire. After all, it's, sexual desire is in your mind or in your brain, so that was a moot point for some of them. The other thing, they say, well, now we are living in a new culture. For a change, we have to face change. And to this, I was laughing this morning about the reference to Oprah, but a lot of the women have, have seen the same program, and so they felt inspired what happened on TV. So, who knew how change happened? So, and they felt that sometimes the length of stay in Canada when outside the community of the African community itself, they could also deter the practice. And some of them, they felt that maybe the level of education or information about the specific issue may also help to discontinue the FGC. There was not a common finding. There was little knowledge for what we could see of the long-term health consequences of FGC. What was clear is that for the women, the issue of having pain or suffering was not associated with the practice itself, but most by the fact that they were women. So they have seen the suffering that was part of being a woman within their community. Therefore, it's not related to this. It's just about the fact that you are a woman, and this is what all women go through. So, that was something that was very clear to us. But still, there were a few who could see through some of the issues, and this is a strong statement that one of them makes. Having circumcision for females is wrong and creates problem. For example, when you give birth, it prolongs delivery and could lead to unnecessary bleeding and could even cause death. So it affects health. But again, it wasn't most most women were not associating these two things, health and being a woman, or the effect of FGC to FGC, but to being a woman. And again, some of the issues around legal issues were brought up. So most knew again that FGC was illegal in their country of origin or many other African countries that they may have lived in. And but also they were aware that increasingly this had become sort of an underground practice that was still happening. And most were unaware that it was illegal, but some could see that was the case for Canada. Yet there were some reference made that this continue in Canada. So again, the legislation or legal issues don't deter completely as a prevention strategy. Then we moved to explore some of the education approaches that will help women to discuss the issues and to move forward in their communities dealing with this. I'm not going to go into details about that because from what we learned from the project is that we have been incorporated in the education sessions, and Linda and Simret are going to speak about that. But in general, there was an overwhelming support for coming together and learning from each other and what could be done to improve their health. And again, you'll see these recommendations in the next presentation this afternoon.
Briefly, this lengthy quote, and it was pages long, was a part of a letter of support from one of the male leaders. And again, I'll let you just take a glimpse of it. But what it shows is that we received strong support, and it was really centered on a great sense of empathy and understanding of the crucial role that women play in family and community, that if supports and if anything can improve things for everyone, it would be we should focus our efforts on women. So that was a good endorsement. They talked about things like it's women's culture to suffer inside. So the men are aware of this, that we need to focus on women for future directions, and they made recommendations to also focus on men and youth. Some of the outcomes then of this first phase of research were that we felt we had achieved a level of trust, dialogue, and exchange, that there was a sense of community readiness. The work we were doing, the feedback was that it was timely, that in the context of migration and of great cultural, generational, and legal changes happening here and abroad. It was important to be doing this work. I think Linda and Simret will speak more about implications that for the actual education sessions. But again, to say that maybe this is basic, but to us to realize that most of the women in the sessions at the grassroots level will still strongly support the practice of FGC. So that needed to be our starting point. Most would be unaware of the long-term health impacts of FGC. No connection to even difficulties in childbirth and labor with the practice of FGC. So by and large, with an exception, there were some who had experienced some awareness, level of education, had been able to question that. We also, of course, had learnings and implications for service providers, because that was a main component of the project. And what we learned, of course, and it was sort of part of our learning process, is that service providers will need to fully understand the social, historical, cultural context that surround FGC and support it, and we would need to examine our own values and beliefs in order to provide service in a non-judgmental manner. We had some preliminary policy implications. I would say as our work has progressed, we have a lot more. But in this first phase of research, clearly there were still barriers to language access, although in Winnipeg we have been, the Health Authority has been working on that in labor and immigration, but there's still a long way to go for women to have the ability to communicate clearly what is happening with their health and wellness to a healthcare provider. Cultural competence training at a systemic level was clearly a need. The system should focus on fulfilling the economic and social security needs of newcomer families. It's not that we shouldn't do everything else in parallel, but from a community-based prevention education approach, that was important for us. We did have recently conducted some community-based research to look at these ideas of engaging men and youth. We haven't done any data analysis, but you can see where it came from, this idea that men and youth need to be involved. We were looking at processes of change. We hired a community-based research team, a man and 2 youth, and we're very lucky today to have Heba and Tinsu here with us, so we are very excited about the work that we've been doing together. And briefly, our methodology, we held training and a very participatory process which informed our methods, informed the questions we were going to ask. We held 5 focus groups with adult men, with male youth, young women, and adult women. The people in focus groups were by and large new to SERC, but perhaps there's a sense of relationship and trust on a community level, so we cut to the chase and asked questions very quickly about FGC. We weren't as hesitant. Here you can see, again, that there were different opinions expressed, but I would say the majority are strongly in favor of FGC or FGM. Women did comment on change. We asked them, so because there were women who were saying education is important, and we are in a new cultural context. So what's the role of men? The role of men wasn't seen to be as key. There was changes, that there was more communication in families, but really it was still strongly a role for women to play in terms of decisions around FGC. And I love that sentence, environment also colonizes people, so things are changing in a new environment. The approaches women made, recommendation for approaches, seminars, there was a strong thread recommendation coming from all the groups about involving religious leaders, because people listen to religious leaders. They talked about women to women work, men to men, youth only, and then we spoke to to young women. And interesting, I think what I meant to say here, they had more insights than male youth, than their counterparts, because some of these discussions were being had with them in terms of proper behavior and why FGC needs to happen. You can see that coming through in the first quote. And you can also see some awareness of change in the campaigns and so on. And now, one of the things we found is a lot of the young women were saying that they're not part of the FGC campaign. Youth don't usually attend the campaigns. Who invited them? And everyone laughed. So, I think that's probably in this, remember we were talking about one community and a community-based setting, but focused on adults. But on the flip side, well, here, you can see strong beliefs supporting the practice. And again, it's in your presentation if you want to take a closer look. But there was some were aware and had been exposed to information in the school setting, and some were contemplating change. So these are all things that are going to inform some of the future work of the project. The male youth had some insights to why it was happening, but it was very much of a outside looking in perspective, very much so. And many of the comments, frankly, were uniformly supportive of change, of ending the practice. And you can see some really lovely, eloquent some of the data gathered by the research team is wonderful and evocative. So I know marriage is a unity of man and woman, but I feel that this doesn't show when we come to circumcision, because this unity will be missing one side. The woman only feels no unity, but soon after she won't take it, and then divorce will accrue. And they could see that there were, and speaking and hinting of impacts on relationships, on marriage of FGC. Again, the men were commenting on how they were sort of left out of the decision-making process, at least prior to circumcision. And similar to the male youth, there was a strong emphasis on change. We will be following a participatory process with the community to really refine our findings. And we'll be publishing it. We'll be publishing, meaning developing reports, and also hopefully sharing a community-friendly report as well. So thank you for your time. Okay.